Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 on this Thursday, the 30th of January. I'm Douglas Mackenzie, bringing you stories from Scotland and around the world. I'm on my own tonight. There is no guest in the studio, which means that we can go into the stories in a little more depth than is usually the case. But despite the lack of studio conversation, I hope the stories, particularly the Scottish ones, which have not been covered very well elsewhere, will stimulate conversation wherever you are, whether watching live or on catch-up. We start the programme, as we start all our news programmes, with the latest from Ukraine on this day 1072 since Russia's full-scale invasion of the country. A Ukrainian Holocaust survivor made an impassioned plea to the German parliament on Wednesday to do more to fight Russia's new war of extermination, as Germany marks 80 years since the liberation of Auschwitz. Back then, Hitler wanted to kill me because I am a Jew, said Roman Schwarzman, aged 88. Now Putin wants to kill me because I am a Ukrainian. Schwarzman, born in Bershad in western Ukraine, was invited to address the Bundestag for its yearly session marking the liberation of the Auschwitz camp in what was Nazi-occupied Poland. Schwarzman, the president of Ukraine's Association for Concentration Camp and Ghetto Survivors, said he had first-hand experience of Russian terror when a missile hit his building in Odessa in December 2023, leaving everything inside his apartment smashed to pieces. I've already been able to escape extermination once, he said, referring to the Holocaust. Now I am an old man and must once again live with the fear that my children and grandchildren could fall victim to a war of extermination. Ukraine has confirmed it struck Lukoil's North Sea refinery, Russia's fourth largest in Kustovo, east of Moscow, and about 800 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. The Ukrainian military said the strike on the refinery in the Nizhny Novgorod region caused a large fire. The Russian petrochemicals company Sibur said it had temporarily suspended operations at its plant in Kustovo after a fire resulting from a drone attack. A Ukrainian drone attack hit Russia's Andriopol oil pumping station, part of the oil export route via the Baltic seaport of Ust-Luga, causing a fire and leaks, a source in the security service of Ukraine said on Wednesday. The attack also hit a Russian missile storage facility in Russia's Tver region, causing a string of explosions. The governor of Russia's Belgorod region said a mother and her 2-year-old child were killed when a drone struck a family home there. He said the child's father and another child had been wounded and taken to hospital. More details emerged of a standoff involving the Ukrainian Defense Minister Rustem Umerov over arms procurement. The investigation began after a watchdog alleged Umerov had illegally sidelined the head of the Defense Procurement Agency, the DPA, Marina Bezrukova. Umerov is refusing to renew her contract after accusing the agency of playing, quote, political games and leaking information. The DPA was created to bring more accountability in arms buying and protect against corruption. The situation surrounding defence procurement has alarmed Ukraine's G7 backers, whose diplomats have urged Ukrainian officials to resolve it quickly. In Russia, a former Deputy Defence Minister, Timur Ivanov, was in court on Wednesday for a preliminary hearing on charges of embezzlement and money laundering. He will be tried alongside Anton Filatov, the former director of State Defence Corporation, Obronlogistika, owned by the Defence Ministry. Investigators have said Ivanov embezzled over 3 billion rubles from a collapsed bank and over 200 million rubles while buying ferries to serve Crimea. Germany's Budget Committee of Parliament called on the Finance Minister Jörg Kukis to approve an additional €3 billion in military aid for Ukraine. The call was backed by the opposition Conservatives of the CDU and the Free Democrats FDP, with the abstention of the governing Social Democrats SPD and the Greens, according to committee members. Next, our Middle East update. At least 47,417 Palestinians have been killed and 111,571 have been wounded in Gaza since the 7th of October 2023, according to the Gaza Health Ministry. 3 Israeli and 5 Thai nationals who had been held in Gaza since the 7th of October attack have been released today under the terms of the ceasefire deal. Pictures showed the Israeli hostages being greeted by their families after arriving back in Israel, while the Thai Prime Minister Paetongtarn Shinawatra said she was elated by the release of the 5 Thais. A total of 110 Palestinian prisoners were also freed by Israel in exchange and were met in Ramallah by cheering crowds. Zakaria Zubeidi, the former leader of a Palestinian militant group who was jailed for attacks that killed several Israelis, was among those released. The prisoner release was delayed after Israel objected to the way in which some of the hostages were led through large crowds before being handed to the Red Cross. It later said it had received assurances of the safe release of hostages in future from mediators. The Israeli military confirmed it had killed approximately 10 Palestinians in a strike on a gathering of armed terrorists, as they called it, in a village in the occupied West Bank. Israel's ban on the UN's Agency for Palestinian Refugees, UNRWA, came into force, with the agency told to vacate its headquarters in Jerusalem. Norway announced an additional $24 million contribution to UNRWA, with its Foreign Minister Espen Barth Eide saying, "Gaza is in ruins, and UNRWA's help is more necessary than ever." The European Union said its foreign ministers would hold separate talks with representatives of Israel and the Palestinian Authority in the coming weeks. Turning to Scotland now, and in a significant moment for culture in Scotland today, Creative Scotland has announced the largest portfolio of cultural organisations ever to be supported on a multi-year basis. The recent uplift in grant and aid funding from the Scottish Government, releasing the largest budget ever available to Creative Scotland, enables more than £200 million in support to be provided to 251 organisations over the next 3 years. Further to this, 13 other organisations will be supported by a £3.2 million development fund, with a view to them joining the multi-year funding portfolio in 2026-2027. Over half of the organisations in the portfolio are being offered a multi-year funding commitment for the first time, reaching more parts of Scotland and more parts of our society than ever before. Those organisations which have an existing regular funding relationship with Creative Scotland will receive an average uplift of 34% in their funding in 2025-26, increasing to an average of 5.54% from 26-27, bringing certainty and stability. Together, the organisations in this portfolio deliver cultural and creative work of a quality, breadth and depth to audiences across Scotland and internationally, and the portfolio is more representative of Scotland's geography, diversity, people and communities than ever before. All this underlines Scotland's reputation as a thriving creative nation, where culture is valued and developed for all. Importantly, the portfolio also provides significant support to Scotland's local and national economy through direct employment, by creating opportunities for freelancers, and by supporting individual artists and creative practitioners of all types. Robert Wilson, chair of Creative Scotland, said, "This is an extremely positive moment for culture in Scotland, bringing with it a renewed sense of stability and certainty to Scotland's culture sector. Thanks to the vote of confidence in the culture sector, demonstrated by the recently announced budget from the Scottish Government, Creative Scotland can offer stable, year-on-year funding to more organisations than ever before." Angus Robertson, Cabinet Secretary for Culture, said, "This is a foundational moment for culture and the arts in Scotland. More organisations than ever in more parts of the country will benefit from the stability of multi-year funding, with the number of funded organisations more than doubling from 119 to 251. Funded as part of a record £34 million increase for culture in the draft 25-26 Scottish Budget, this significant increase in both the number of funded organisations and the level of grant funding they will receive has the potential to be truly transformational. It serves to secure the future of key cultural organisations of all sizes across Scotland," he said. The Court of Session in Edinburgh has ruled that the decision to greenlight the giant Rosebank oil field off Shetland was unlawful, in a major win for climate action that scientists say is urgently needed. The proposed Rosebank development, Scotland's biggest untapped oil field, had been given the go-ahead in 2023 under the previous UK government. In the Court of Session in Edinburgh today, the court sided with campaigners and climate experts in ruling that the original decisions to permit Rosebank and a second smaller gas field called Jackdaw were unlawful, as they had not taken into account the carbon emissions created by burning any oil and gas produced. Tessa Khan from the campaign group Uplift, which has been at the forefront of the campaign to stop Rosebank, said the court ruling was a significant milestone. "This means that Rosebank cannot go ahead without accounting for its enormous climate harm," she said. Philip Evans from Greenpeace, which with Uplift challenged Rosebank and separately challenged Jackdaw, described the judgment as a historic win. "The age of governments approving new drilling sites by ignoring their climate impacts is over," he said. "The courts have agreed with what climate campaigners have said all along. Rosebank and Jackdaw are unlawful, and their full climate impacts must now be properly considered." Campaigners had argued that there was no economic, energy security, or climate rationale for drilling for more oil and gas in the North Sea. The vast majority of any oil produced is sold on the international markets, so it does not add to energy security for UK consumers, and repeated statements from the International Energy Agency have said no new oil and gas exploration should take place if the world is to limit global heating to 1.5 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial temperatures. Instead, trade unions and climate justice campaigners argue that the government should invest in renewable energy to meet climate goals, safeguard oil workers and their communities, and provide cheap, secure energy. Today's ruling means that the decisions on Jackdaw and Rosebank are set to return to the UK government, which has pledged not to grant any new licences for oil and gas in the North Sea basin, although technically that does not include granting production licences, which is what both Rosebank and Jackdaw would require. A spokesman for the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, DESNZ, said the government had already consulted on revised environmental guidance to take into account emissions from burning extracted oil and gas, and is expected to report back in the spring. Lauren MacDonald from the Stop Rosebank campaign said the oil and gas companies did not have Scotland's interests at heart. Analysis published today by the Office of the Chief Economic Advisor has estimated Brexit trade barriers could impact Scotland's economy by £4 billion. This estimated economic cost is from the reduction in trade alone, not counting changes to productivity, investment or migration. Scottish Government Business Minister Richard Lochhead said the report demonstrated the urgent need to reverse the damage of Brexit, to boost living standards and revenue for the NHS. According to the trade modelling report, Scottish exports could be lower by 7.2% or £3 billion compared to continued EU membership. The chemical and pharmaceutical sector is estimated to be one of the hardest hit by post-Brexit trade barriers, with an estimated 9.1% reduction in output, followed by the computer and electronics sector with an estimated 7.7% fall. The 4.9% output drop estimated for the agri-food sector represents a loss of £827 million. Business Minister Richard Lochhead said, "On the eve of the 5th anniversary of Brexit, these new figures highlight the urgent need to change course to boost the economy and increase public revenue for the NHS. This is the latest in a long line of studies highlighting how badly Brexit continues to impact Scotland and should cause the UK government to consider its approach to economic growth." The Scottish Government has been clear that Scotland's place is in the EU and the huge European single market. But we are also a voice for greater cooperation with the EU right now, and we urge the new UK Government to forge a much closer relationship with our fellow Europeans. Ahead of the 5th anniversary of the UK leaving the European Union, the SNP has said that Anna Sarwar's Labour Party would, quote, "lock Scotland out of the EU for a generation." Despite the significant harm leaving the EU has done to Scotland's businesses, public services and the economy, the Labour leader in Scotland has ruled out working to rejoin the single market or customs union, despite having previously been in favour of EU membership. The SNP said it is clear that Sarwar is under strict orders from his boss in London, Sir Keir Starmer, to U-turn on his original position, no matter the damage it is inflicting on Scotland. Almost 5 years on from leaving the EU, the ever-increasing consequences that Brexit is having on the UK's economy and key industries include £30.2 billion for the cost of Britain's settlement with the EU, according to the latest Treasury estimates. A drop of £2.8 billion in food exports to the EU each year since the end of the transition period, according to the Centre for Inclusive Trade Policy. A drop of £27 billion in goods exports in 2022 alone, according to the Centre for Economic Performance at LSE. An annual shortfall in Treasury finances of almost £45 billion, according to European Movement UK, and £100 billion in lost output each year. The SNP says the only way ahead for Scotland is to take its place back within the EU as an independent nation. Commenting, SNP MSP Stuart McMillan said, "Like everything else, Anna Sarwar has flip-flopped on Scotland's place in the EU, having now bowed to pressure from Sir Keir Starmer to rule out Scotland rejoining the single market or customs union. It is clear that Anna Sarwar and his Labour Party would lock Scotland out of the EU for a generation. Leaving the EU has cost Scotland's economy billions of pounds, has left our public services short-staffed, and removed our right to study, live and work across Europe. It is a national imperative that we return to the EU. The SNP will not stop fighting for Scotland to rejoin the EU, and the best way to do that is as an independent nation." And now news on WASPI women. The Scottish Party leaders have joined Social Security Secretary Shirley-Ann Somerville in writing to Prime Minister Keir Starmer to demand justice for WASPI women. Ms Somerville committed during a parliamentary debate last week to coordinate a cross-party letter to the UK government on WASPI. The letter was co-signed by Alex Cole-Hamilton and Lorna Slater. However, Labour declined to co-sign the letter. Shirley-Ann Somerville said, "The UK Labour government has completely betrayed older people since they came to office, first cutting winter fuel payments and then refusing to pay WASPI women the compensation they deserve. I am very grateful to those party leaders in the Scottish Parliament who have joined with me to call on the UK government to deliver justice for the WASPI women. I was pleased that last week the Scottish Parliament spoke with one voice on delivering justice for WASPy women, but that is why it is so disappointing that Scottish Labour has now refused to join the cross-party calls directly to the Prime Minister to demand that the UK government deliver the compensation these women are due. WASPy women will no doubt feel let down that Labour will say one thing in the chamber at Holyrood, but do another thing entirely when it comes to making direct calls to the Prime Minister. The UK Labour government's failure to deliver justice for WASPy women is completely unacceptable. Scottish Labour has a choice to make. Will they stand up for Scotland's pensioners, or will they stand up for the Prime Minister? The Labour leader in Scotland's refusal to sign the letter followed Labour's Scotland Office Minister Kirsty McNeil saying in a radio interview that to pay the compensation to WASPy women as recommended by the Parliamentary Health Service Ombudsman would not, quote, represent a fair or responsible use of public money. Back to oil now, and Shell paid its investors a total of $22.5 billion in 2024, narrowly short of the company's own profits for the year, which had tumbled in line with weaker oil and gas markets. Europe's biggest oil company handed its investors the multi-billion-dollar windfall, despite reporting weaker than expected profits of $23.7 billion. It has faced calls from climate campaigners to divert more of its profits to renewable energy projects and away from shareholder payouts. The fossil fuel investors, which include major pension funds, are now in line for a 4% dividend increase alongside share buybacks of $3.5 billion over the first 3 months of the year. This could put investors in line for payouts of around $23 billion in the year ahead, assuming that its buybacks remain at about $3.5 billion a quarter. Shell's payouts lifted its shares 2.6% and helped the FTSE 100 index hit a record closing price of 8,646.88 points, a 1.04% gain. Campaigners at Global Witness, which analysed the company's financial reports, said the company had chosen to ply its investors with cash rather than increase its investments in clean energy alternatives. Shell's spending on oil and gas eclipsed its spending on renewables by more than 7 times last year, according to the group's analysis. Shell spent $18.3 billion on its traditional fossil fuel businesses last year and just over $2.5 billion on renewables and energy solutions over the same period. The lucrative quarter for Shell shareholders marks the 13th consecutive quarter in which Shell has given its investors buybacks of more than $3 billion, despite worse than expected earnings from its oil and gas operations. The company reported adjusted annual earnings of $23.7 billion for 2024, missing the forecast of Citi analysts who had expected an annual profit of just over $24 billion for the year. Commenting, Scottish Greens climate spokesman Mark Ruskell MSP said, "The destructive profiteering and climate-wrecking choices of oil giants like Shell are having a devastating impact on our planet." Mr. Ruskell added, "We're sitting on a goldmine of green energy sources here in Scotland, but we won't see the benefit without fundamental government support." To the USA now, and no survivors are expected to be found following a mid-air collision of an American Airlines jet and a military Black Hawk helicopter near Washington, D.C., authorities have said. The bodies of 28 people have already been retrieved by search and rescue teams from the Potomac River. The collision occurred at about 9 p.m. on Wednesday, as the jet was on approach to land at Reagan National Airport from Wichita, Kansas. Operated by the regional carrier PSA Airlines as American Eagle Flight 5342, the plane was carrying 60 passengers and 4 crew members and collided with a US Army helicopter with 3 soldiers on board, sending both into the river. It was the first fatal commercial airline crash in the US since 2009, according to Sean Duffy, Trump's newly confirmed transportation secretary, who was sworn into office the day before the crash. He added that he believed the incident was preventable. The Bombardier CRJ-700 jet broke into three parts and was in waist-deep water in the Potomac, Duffy said. Both the helicopter and the passenger plane were flying in a, quote, standard flight pattern on a clear night before the crash, and that investigators would work to ascertain how the accident occurred, he added. Trump's Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said the helicopter involved carried, quote, a fairly experienced crew based at Fort Beaver in Virginia that was conducting a required annual night evaluation. Donald Trump said on Thursday morning he had been, quote, fully briefed on the incident, after implying in the hours after the crash that the helicopter crew or air traffic control tower was responsible for the collision. More than 300 emergency workers, including divers, deployed to the Potomac, where they faced packed ice and high winds. John Donnelly, Washington, D.C.'s fire chief, said the operation's objective had shifted from rescue to recovery. We don't believe there are any survivors from this accident, he told a press conference on Thursday morning. Donnelly said that the wreckage from the aircraft had been spread out by the wind, but that recovery efforts continued, and he was confident rescuers could recover all the bodies. Of those found so far, 27 were from the plane and 1 from the helicopter. Reagan National Airport was closed immediately after the incident, but was scheduled to reopen on Thursday morning. A helpline for family and friends of those potentially affected has been set up by American Airlines. In Germany now, and former German Chancellor Angela Merkel has criticised Friedrich Merz, her eventual successor as leader of the country's Conservatives, for pushing through proposals on migration and asylum with the backing of the far-right AfD party. In a rare intervention in public affairs since stepping down from politics in December 2021, Merkel said Merz, who is tipped to become Germany's next chancellor, had in effect performed a U-turn. On her website, she wrote that Merz, head of the centre-right CDU-CSU alliance, had said in a speech last November that he was against passing policies with the support of the generally shunned AfD, even if it was by accident. She said she stood by the long-standing conviction that there should never be any association between the mainstream parties and the AfD. I think it is wrong to no longer feel bound to this proposal, thereby allowing a majority with the votes of the AfD in a vote in the German Bundestag for the first time on the 29th of January 2025, she said. Wednesday's vote was unprecedented. For the first time, the AfD, second in the polls before the election on 23rd of February, was instrumental in helping a mainstream party towards a parliamentary majority. The pro-business FDP also contributed to the motion's success. Merkel was praised for her comments published today, including by Saskia Esken, co-leader of the Social Democrats SPD, the senior partner in the coalition government before Parliament was dissolved. Merz has faced criticism from the SPD and the Greens, the constituent parts of Olaf Scholz's minority government, for failing to try to reach a compromise with them after they put proposals for migration reform on the table that they say have been largely ignored by the opposition. We return to Scotland for our final story tonight. Scotland's National Librarian Amina Shah has announced plans to mark the National Library of Scotland's 100th birthday with a year-long programme of events and initiatives. The National Library was established by an Act of Parliament in 1925 and since then has amassed and cared for a collection of more than 50 million items spanning many centuries on behalf of the people of Scotland, all of whom are entitled to free access to the collections. National Librarian Amina Shah said, "A century ago, we were established in the spirit of egalitarianism, where our founders, including Sir Alexander Grant, held a firm belief that the people of Scotland deserved a national library to call their own, one which anyone living here could access. The Act of Parliament states that we exist to collect and preserve the national collections, and make them accessible to the public through our reading rooms, exhibitions, and other means of engaging people with Scotland's culture and heritage. We increased our efforts to reach more and new people with the collection in recent years with great success, and our intention is to accelerate this during the year of our 100th birthday by working in partnership with Scotland's network of amazing libraries. And so I'm delighted to announce our centenary programme, a nationwide libraries campaign, our major exhibition, our national tour, all of which have the potential to connect with every individual across the country. It is our ambition that the impact our centenary programme will have on communities throughout Scotland will continue far beyond 2025. When it was established, the National Library was endowed with the non-legal aspects of the Faculty of Advocates collections, ultimately making it the holder of the largest collection of antiquarian books north of Cambridge. The library was also established as a legal deposit library, meaning it has the right to claim a copy of everything published in the UK. This right remains today and includes digital publications. While the National Library was awaiting a home, it started life in the Faculty of Advocates building. Work began on the George IV Bridge site in the 1930s, but due to the Second World War, most of the building work took place in the 1950s. Queen Elizabeth II officially opened the new National Library building in Edinburgh in July 1956. Angus Robertson, MSP, Cabinet Secretary for Constitution, External Affairs and Culture, said, "The National Library of Scotland has been a cornerstone of our nation's cultural life for a century, preserving and sharing Scotland's remarkable and complex history. For 100 years, through successive Acts of Parliament and the continued support of the Scottish Government, it has safeguarded our written and recorded heritage, from ancient manuscripts to the digital content of today." The centenary highlights include a nationwide Love Libraries campaign to highlight the importance of libraries and encourage people to show love to their local library from around Valentine's Day. Authors Val McDermott and Damien Barr have been named as centenary champions. A major centenary exhibition, Dear Library, celebrating libraries and what people love about books and reading, opens in June of this year. Mary Queen of Scots' last letter will leave the National Library for the first time in a generation to go on display in Perth Museum, its special centenary loan programmes, which will also see national collections travelling to Aberdeen and Shetland. Events to look out for throughout the year include a curtain raiser event on the 28th of March and tours and talks. Well, that's it for this evening's slightly curtailed Scotland at 7. Before I go, I just want to remind you that Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. We raised £20,000 from April to the end of 2024, £16,000 short of our £36,000 target. We had to borrow £12,000 to enable us to pay our bills and survive, but the pressure is still on and we need to find enough regular donors to give us financial security. We face costs of over £4,000 every month, but only receive donations of around £2,500. We need more regular subscribers, but we need to clear our debts as well. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. And please, donate whatever you can afford. So thank you very much at home or wherever you are for watching. If you want to comment on our programme or on Broadcasting Scotland generally, we have an account on Blue Sky and on the other place, formerly known as Twitter, and would welcome your comments. Please join us again tomorrow for Scotland at 7 at the same time. But for me, goodbye and thank you for watching.